Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's really nice to see so many people, some familiar ones, some new ones. My name is Stephanie Butland. I'm a novelist, and I'm just about to pop some slides up, so just bear with me. There we go. So you can see there I've written 2 memoirs, How I Said Bye to Cancer and Thrive, and 5 novels which are along the bottom there. I've got a 6th coming out in August. It's called Nobody's Perfect. My writing career so far has spanned about 10 years, and I'm here to really share my I was going to say my wisdom, my experience, some of it one not very wisely. So what we'll do is we'll cover mindset, process, do's, don'ts and maybes. I'm going to talk for maybe 20-25 minutes. Then I think Anna's got some questions, and then I think she'll be opening up the floor to any questions that you have. So I hope that sounds okay. Here we go then. Mindset, really, really crucially important. And really 2 major things here that I think are crucial. One is that editing is writing. Okay, I think it's really easy to get into a mindset where like all the planning is like really boring and really awful and really tedious, and you can't wait to get writing, and then you write, and then you've got to do like all the really tedious editing and blah. Actually, the whole thing is writing. Planning is writing, thinking is writing, walking and trying to figure stuff out is writing, hundreds of post-it notes is writing, ripping it all up and going back to the beginning is writing. So is the writing part. So is the editing part, where you take it from, in my case, kind of a heap of words and make it into something meaningful. So I think there's a mindset that's really important, which says that editing is also writing. Most things are writing. Cleaning out your kitchen cupboards isn't. Spending hours faffing about on Twitter isn't. But, you know, most things, when it comes to editing, you should think of as writing. So the whole process of being a writer encompasses everything you do, from thinking, oh, do you know what would be really interesting, to getting to the end of your 3rd or 4th kind of edit and thinking, this is ready for someone else to read. So mindset is crucially important, I think. So typically, if I'm say it takes a year to write a book, then I would pretty much divide that into 4, 4, 4. So 4 months of planning, which also involves some little bits of writing and kind of feeling my way, 4 months of writing, and then 4 months of editing of one sort and another. So broadly speaking, that's how I would chunk it up. Therefore, it's much better to think of the whole thing as writing, rather than thinking of a third of it as being the fun stuff and the rest things that you have to endure. So that's mindset. And then find your inner griffin. So a griffin, as you may well know, is a mythological creature with the body and back legs of a lion and the wings, beak and talon of a hawk or an eagle. So a really ferocious creature. 3 major characteristics that you'll find if you read about griffins. They are known to be intelligent, monogamous and ferocious. And I think these 3 really important elements when it comes to editing. Be intelligent, bring your best brain to editing. You really need it. It's a really important job, and it deserves all of your best attention. Be monogamous as well. It's really hard to edit if you've got your eye on 4 other things at the same time. So for me, editing is a real lock everything down and don't look at other stuff thing, you know, even to the extent of, it would be really easy to Google something and quickly look it up, but I'm just going to write it on a post-it note and look for it later. So being monogamous, I think, is crucial in editing. That's not to say don't work on something else, but be really clear about delineating editing time and giving it all of your intelligence. And, you know, be ferocious, rip the flesh off your manuscript. That's what it needs. Okay, be ruthless. So if you bring these 2 elements to your mindset, that editing is writing, that you're a griffin, you're fierce, and you're going to rip all of the extraneous stuff away, and that you're going to do it with intelligence and with focus, then you'll do a really good job of an edit. Okay, so now let's talk about process. If you follow me on social media, or if you've met me for more than 5 minutes in real life, you'll know that I knit. I love to knit. And for me, knitting is a really good analogy for the process of writing and the process of editing. you knit stitch by stitch. You can't rush, you can't skip bits, you can't go straight to the end. The only way to knit a thing is to knit every single stitch of it. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going through the boring bits, keep going through the bits that go wrong, or the bits that feel a bit odd, and eventually you'll get to the end and you'll create something beautiful. You will get there. Quite often with knitting, as in writing, it's not entirely what you thought you were going to get, but it will still have its own beauty. So this for me is the starting point of the process of writing and editing, that it's a step-by-step word process. So that's the overall. In terms of the nuts and bolts of it, 3 things. First of all, consider your reader. You are not writing a book for you. You're writing a book for your readers. Your readers are the important part of this equation. You are not. I am not. Elmore Leonard, the American novelist, wrote 10 pieces of advice for writers, and one of them is try to leave out the parts that the reader will skip. And I think that's a really important part of the process. So what you're thinking about all the time when you're editing is this important to the reader? Does it help them to understand something? Does it help them to see how the story is moving along? Does it give them a new perspective? Okay. If it's 3 pages of weather, no matter how lovely the description is, it's probably not for the reader, it's probably for you. Don't know if anyone has read The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. The writing is glorious, but there are 10 solid pages of descriptions of snakes. I don't mind snakes, but enough's enough. So you're always asking yourself, this lovely paragraph that I wrote, is it helping the reader or not? And if it's not, it needs to go. I like to do 1 edit per thing, she says scientifically. So usually I'll do 4 edits, and I'll do that because I find it easier to go through looking for one thing and then the next and then the next and then the next. So for me, number 1 is a structural edit. That is, have I got all of the things in the right places? Do the moments of tension come at the right places? Does the resolution happen at the right pace? Would it be stronger if we didn't find this out here but found it out there? So a lot of it's just moving stuff around, just making it make sense and making it good for the reader as well. So sometimes if you're considering your reader, you think, oh, would the reader get a fright if they found that out later? What if the reader didn't know this? And that all leads to your structural edit. Get everything in the right place. Then I do what I call a character edit. And really what I'm doing there is I'm looking for consistency, I'm looking for links, I'm looking for just kind of making sure that characters kind of hang together, that relationships make sense. Just does it all feel right? There's nothing that jars people. There's nothing that makes people go, hold on, I didn't think they were a black belt. Just kind of, what's the character, and does it grow? Does it make sense? Does it kind of work along with the narrative? So that's my second thing. First I've looked structurally, then I've looked at what I call a character edit. Then I do what I like to call the boring stuff edit. So this is, do people have the same color eyes all the way through? Does the timeline work? How long does it take to get from Peterborough to London on the train? All of that stuff. It just makes sense to me to do that all in one go, because if I'm trying to do that while I'm thinking about the structure, while I'm thinking about the characters, A, I get in a mess, and B, I can waste a lot of time working out how you'd get from Glasgow to, I don't know, John O'Groats on a bus. And then maybe I'll actually end up cutting that part out altogether because maybe the reader doesn't need to know it. So it also saves you time. And then finally, I'll come to the line edit. So structural edit, character edit, boring stuff edit, line edit. I print the whole thing out and I go through paper, post-its, and I read every sentence aloud, and I just kind of think, does this work? Does this work? Does this work? Generally speaking, if I have to read it twice, or if I read to the end of the sentence and think, oh, I put the emphasis in the wrong place, then it doesn't work, and I need to just kind of restart that sentence, figure it out. So that's the process for me. Lots of paper, lots of post-it notes. That's a picture of my desk. And that's actually that was actually when I was getting to the end of a first draft rather than an edit, but you can see all of those post-it notes. And what they are is me typing, thinking, oh, I mustn't forget that I need this to happen earlier on, write it on post-it note, bang it down, and then go back to it when I kind of get to the end. So the other thing that I would say under process is I try to start at the beginning, get to the end, and then go back and look for the next thing, rather than jump back and forward. I just find it easier and it feels more like progress to do that, which I think is important. So that's process. Now let's talk about do's, don'ts, and maybes. Oh, look, is that man writing? This picture's called something like the genius of creativity. I forget, but anyway, there he is. This is very much the traditional idea of the writer. I haven't got time for that. So here are my do's, don'ts, and maybes. Okay. Do set up a file for the bits that you cut. I've done this with every book, and I've now got 7 files that, I'm going to be honest, I've never looked at again, but it doesn't matter because it's horrible to throw things away. Even if you've been a grown-up and you've said to yourself, the reader does not need this, the reader does not need 10 pages of snakes, it's really hard to just delete it. So stick it in a file. And although I say I've never looked at them again, that's probably slightly untrue. There's probably kind of bits of ideas that I've taken into short stories and things like that. And, you know, it just feels like you're valuing your work, even if your work doesn't quite need to be in this book at this point, at this time. I've already touched on this, but you're always asking, does the reader need this? They don't, cut it out. Also, can you let the reader do, not all, but some of the work? So, for example, with a description, you don't need to describe someone from head to toe. You don't need to know everything about their life. Your job as a writer is to put in the bits that will help people to understand that character, understand their place in the world. So if you've read my novel Lost for Words, then in the first couple of pages, you find out that the main character dyes her hair, has a piercing, has tattoos, and is just a little bit wary of the way people approach her and the way she approaches people. That's all you need to know. There is no point at which I don't know that we know how tall she is. I don't know that we know all the schools that she went to. She certainly never looked in a mirror and described herself to herself. You know, we don't need a massive level of detail. What we need is, I think, as a writer, to be saying to the reader, just pay attention to this. This is important. But if you can free yourself from the need to describe everything in all the detail, then you'll get better writing, you get better reader engagement, and you'll get a better book, whatever book you're writing. Do learn to love said. When you're editing, I've put this in specifically because when you're editing, it's like it just kind of, it's a word that jumps up and hits you in the eye all the time. Said. And any other word, you would think, oh, I've said blue 14 times on a page. It's not okay. And you would be right about blue. But when it comes to said, it's a word that kind of disappears in the text. So readers don't notice it, and we're thinking about the reader. But also, you know, muttering and shouting and yelling and mumbling and all of these kinds of descriptive words that people put in, they distract the reader. And to me, it's more important that the words do the work than that the descriptors do the work. So rather than say, I don't like it, she shouted, I'd say, I'd have something like, Jesus Christ, there is absolutely no way that we're doing that, he said, or not even he said, he raised his voice, you know. So just be really aware that it's okay to use said. It's the one word that it's fine to see a lot of. And the other thing to do is fact check. I think maybe even all the more for fiction than non-fiction. I think writing a novel is the fastest way to find out, for me anyway, that I know nothing about anything. And so it's really always worth checking. In my first novel, I had a doctor playing a really important role, a GP. And after I'd written it, I then bought a coffee for a GP friend of mine and asked her about some things. And there was one point where I had the GP, I think, going to school, and my friend said, "Oh, GP would never do that." And I was just like, but no, they wouldn't. Like, but if the GP surgery was next to the school, and she's just like, no, this is not what would happen. The school would not do that. This is not. So I ended up having to rewrite this doctor's role quite substantially and kind of put other things in place. So it's worth fact checking, even the things that you think you know. It's worth fact checking because readers know, and readers will let you know. I've got a couple of examples, one relatively inconsequential and one more so. A friend of mine wrote about a character, I'm going to get this the wrong way around, but I think taking ibuprofen caplets, and got a furious letter because they don't come in caplets, or something else. She said tablets and they don't come in tablets. I wrote a novel called The Woman in the Photograph, and it has quite a lot of historical context. So it has sections which just tell you in 1978 what was happening, in 1980 what was happening, and so on. And I researched them fairly sketchily in the beginning just to get a sense, and then I went back and I checked, but I didn't check something which was, in the first edition it says about Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, killing sex workers. And when I looked it up initially, I'd actually put the word prostitutes in. I remember my editor and I having a long conversation about how sex workers was a better way to kind of express this. But of course they weren't sex workers, and also it doesn't matter. They were women and they were killed by a man. And I just kind of missed it. I think I got distracted by the semantics, and I just kind of missed it. And then I got an email. I got several emails from women who'd grown up in that part of the country at that time, just saying, what this is a book about feminism, why does it matter? And I was mortified, and I remained mortified, and I corrected it in subsequent books, but I really wish that I'd just examined that a bit more closely. So check your facts. I was going to say even, but maybe especially the facts that you think you know. So there's my do's. Don't worry too much about little things. Okay. Nobody is going to reject your manuscript because you missed out an apostrophe. I've just edited or been through the edits of a novel, and once again, I've proved that I don't know the difference between a hyphen, an M dash, and an N dash. And probably 2,000 of my corrections were me accepting the changes from one to the other. Doesn't matter. Nobody's going to reject a novel because there's a few stray apostrophes in it. Don't pay too much attention to your doubts either. It's reasonable to doubt. I think it's terrifying to have so much confidence that you think your work is perfect and there's nothing wrong with it and everyone should love it. So yeah, let yourself doubt, but don't let your doubts dictate your days, I guess. Just go, okay, I'm doubting you today. Okay, let's get on and do some work. And the other thing that I would say is don't get seduced by your next thing. They generally roll along when you're just really fed up with the novel that you're writing. Something will come along and go, oh, look at me though, I'm better, I'm prettier, I'm shinier, I'm much more commercial, come to me. Okay, they may be all of those things, but it's just a really good idea to finish what you're doing. If it's your first novel, it's great to be able to say I finished a novel. It's if you abandon something at 80% and then start something else, you haven't written a novel. If you push through that last 20% and get it there, then you have. It might not be a great novel, but you've written a novel. So I think that's really important. And also I think going back to what we were saying at the beginning about mindset, it's just a good idea to think of yourself as someone who finishes things. And if you think of editing as part of the process of writing, then that's easier. So when the next thing, starts making glad eyes at you, then just write those ideas down on a post-it note, leave them and say, I'm going to get to you, but I've just got to finish this thing first. And the maybes. Oh, actually, I'll just say one more thing about the tiny things. My first novel I wrote as a series of intersecting, interlocking first-person narratives. And when it was, so this was letters to my husband, and the editor who bought it said, before she bought it, said, would you mind rewriting it as a third-person narrative? So, you know, if an editor likes something, then small things don't get in the way. And that's quite a big thing. She asked me about it because she wanted to make sure that I was happy to do it, and she wanted to make sure that it was kind of in line with what I wanted for the book, which it was. But if we can ask writers to change a book on that level, then it just goes to show you that people who buy books, people who are interested in books, are seeing beyond the surface of it and asking questions about whether it should be different. So that's okay. And here are our maybes. Maybe give it one more read before you send it to anybody. The world of publishing is rarely on fire. So another week, generally speaking, unless you're writing something very, very topical, won't make a difference. And even if you're writing something very, very topical, even then it's a week's not going to matter. So if you can bear to just give it one more read before you go, then it's worth it. Most editors and agents will say that the major reason that they reject things is that they're just not ready for submission. They might be really good, but they can't tell because they need that book to have had one more edit. Maybe ask for feedback. So give your novel to people that you trust to read. Okay. Don't ask for suggestions. Here's why. If a reader tells you that something in your book doesn't work, they're right. If they say, oh, I didn't really get him, or I didn't really understand that, or I don't know why X meant Y, or I don't really understand who H is, even after you told me. If readers tell you that, they are right. They are absolutely right, because that's their experience. If they tell you how to fix it, then they're generally wrong. Not because there's anything wrong with readers, just because a reader will often kind of jump to the obvious thing, or they will be thinking back to books that they've read that are similar, or they're making a connection between one character in one book and another character in another book. So feedback is useful, suggestions are not. Okay. And do maybe take your doubts seriously. Okay, I think it's normal to turn up at the page and to feel a bit meh about something, and I think it's useful to think of your work as being, I think of the thing that I'm working on is a fixed thing, and then the way that I feel about it is a changing thing. Okay, so Monday is amazing, Tuesday it's going to win all the prizes, Wednesday it needs to go on a bonfire. Okay, objectively it's pretty much the same lump of words, but you just, the way that you feel about it changes. That's okay. Okay, but if there's one little thing just ticking away at you, then that's worth listening to you. If every time you sit down and you look at something, you're thinking, I just don't quite buy that, or I'm not sure about that. If it's one thing over and over again that you're not sure about, then maybe listen to your instinct and take that seriously. See if you could do something about it. So that is a canter through my wisdom on the subject of editing. Actually, one thing more that I'm going to say that I meant to pop into the slides and I forgot to was that I think when you go into an edit, it's a really good idea if you can have like a sentence in your head that just encapsulate what the book is about. Okay, it's not a pitch line. It's not even necessarily something that a reader would perceive as being what the book is about, but it will just help you to keep on track. So Lost for Words, for example, is a novel about a woman coming out of hiding. And so when I was editing that book, that was everything, that all of my changes, all of my things, I was always thinking, is this serving this story? The Curious Heart of Ailsa Ray, I wrote in a panic because I made the classic mistake of thinking I only had a year to write it and therefore I didn't have time to plan it. So I just kind of rushed into it. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and I edited it, but I didn't, or I revised it, but I didn't, but I knew I wasn't doing a good job. So what I delivered to my editor was 125,000 words of a novel that ended up being about 85,000 words. And I said to her, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this book is. And she read it and she came back to me and she said, there are lots of things this book could be. It could be a romance, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. She said, I think it's a book that's brave about death. Go find the book that's brave about death. And actually after that, it was fine. I literally put a post-it note above my desk. There's always a post-it note that said a book that is brave about death. And I just kept looking at that. So I guess my kind of off the slides tip is give yourself a sentence of what your novel is about. And then as you're editing, that's your measure. So the novel that I've just finished, or I finished last year, that's out in August, is called Nobody's Perfect, and it's a novel about a young woman growing into the world. That's what it's about. And you won't see that on the back of the book, you won't see it in the blurb, you probably won't even think it when you read it, but that's to me, that's what the heart of it is, and that's what was my kind of lodestar, if you like, as I was writing. So that's me, Anna.
Thank you so much. I genuinely love that last bit of advice, and I'm so glad you added it, even though it wasn't on the slide, because I think we get so focused, don't we, on the query letter and how we're going to sell it to publishers and everything, but actually we need to know what the heart of our story is, and you'd probably never sell The Curious Art of Elsa Ray by saying this is a book about death. But actually knowing that that's like the heart of it, and that actually that's what you need to talk about, that's really important for you, and then you'd sell it in beautiful other ways. But I think that's really cool. So I've got a few questions that I've pre-prepared. So the first one is and it's something that I'm always interested in. It's nothing to do with editing, but how did you get into writing?
Oh, okay, good question. So I always wanted to be a writer, like most writers. I think it was always my thing, and I did an English degree, and I kind of, again, probably like most writers, I just kind of left university and realized there weren't people lining up to throw money at me for my half-written plays and various other things, and I kind of drifted into working on other things and built a career elsewhere. And then when I was 37, so 13 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I started to write a blog, and it just reconnected me with the absolute love I have for using words to express something in the best possible way. So it's not a route I'd recommend, Anna.
I'll maybe try a different one. But
don't do that, everybody. But yeah, it was, my grandma used to say that what's for you won't go by you, and I often think about that, because it was my kind of way around to where I kind of wanted to be, needed to be.
Thank you. What a wonderful thing to take out of that, I guess. Is like what to take from it. Question 2, which do you prefer? And I know that you said to think of it all as writing, but I'm just going to put you on the spot now. Which do you prefer, drafting or editing?
Oh, okay.
You must decide.
Okay, well, I like drafting because there's a kind of lovely, especially at the beginning, there's a lovely kind of heedlessness about it. So I love that. And then I kind of slightly fall out of it towards the end of a draft, because I'm just like, I've got too many things in my head, and I'm just desperate to get it over with. And the beginning of editing feels like that as well. But then I think there's something about editing that takes this kind of lump of words and makes it into something that can be beautiful, and it's never quite what I think it's going to be when I set out, but it's, if I work hard and I do well and I've kind of got the bits right, it's very close, and I find that hugely satisfying. So I'm going to say beginning of drafting, end of editing.
I like it. I like how you've managed to not quite answer the question and say it was good. Now, you've written both fiction and non-fiction, and I was just wondering, how does it differ, editing those two? And sort of what's the same as well, I guess.
Sorry?
And what's the same as well?
Yeah, okay. I think what's different and what's the same. What's different is, I suppose, in a way, there's especially because I wrote memoirs, I suppose there's less to question and less to challenge for an editor, because what you're doing, what I was doing, is kind of sharing my lived experience. So you can't have somebody going, oh, but what if the chemotherapy went really wrong? that would be better. What if the near-death experience was near in the beginning? So you in a way, your framework is already there. Your framework is constructed by your experience, whereas with fiction, you can do whatever you like. So editorially, I would say there's more input from a fiction editor in terms of the shape of the story, and in terms of sort of on a sentence level, I think, and on connection with the reader, it's very much the same. I would say it's very much about what is the best and clearest way to express this. How do we bring people most closely to the reality? So I think those things are broadly the same.
The beautiful soundtrack there.
I know.
I would say, so I've edited a couple of memoirs for people, and I would say that one of the things that I think must be a real struggle when writing something from your lived experience is what to include and what not to include. And sort of, because to you everything is important, everything added up to what happened. But actually that sort of real difficulty of including, actually, like you said, what the reader needs to know.
Yes, absolutely. And what is the story? Yes, because that's true. Actually, you're still striving to find a story within a memoir, which I think is interesting. It's an interesting trend, actually, in what's often called creative nonfiction at the moment. So things like The Salt Path by Raina Wynn or Wild by Cheryl Strayed are their memoirs, but they're memoirs around a very specific kind of set of experiences. So yeah,
really interesting. So you've had many books published, which is very exciting, and I'm very excited about the next one coming out in August. And so what is it like working with an editor and getting ready for publication, and kind of what are those stages that you go through with them?
Okay. I love working with editors. I think the big thing that you don't see when you're outside the industry that you see when you get in is the role that editors have in shaping something that gets it ready for publication. Because as a writer, you're looking at the story that you're telling. An editor is looking at the reader's experience of the story that you're telling. They're looking at the rest of the books that are around. They're looking at what they perceive as what's unique to you, which is probably not what you perceive as being what's unique to you. So I think an editor's job is to kind of draw out the essential you-ness of your writing and help you to express it. It's huge. I find it hugely helpful. It's kind of, there's always a stage where you submit a manuscript and then you get an email from your editor going, great job, this is amazing, I love it. I've attached some notes. So sometimes I allow myself a day between reading the covering email and then going in and reading the notes, which kind of go, so here are the things that we might want to think about. So yeah, I think I really enjoy, because to me writing is not about writers, it's about readers. I really just enjoy making a novel the best that it can be, and having an editor go, what about this, what about that? It's hugely helpful to me. It depends a little bit on the editor. Every now and again you work with an editor and you just like 100% get each other, and then it becomes a kind of creative process all of its own. So that's wonderful. But yeah, editors are brilliant. They have like amazing clever brains that work in a slightly different way to writers' brains, and the chemistry I find is really helpful.
And so in terms of stages, does it kind of go through the same stages you've gone through, where there's like a structural edit and then there's so usually structural edit, sometimes a subsequent structural edit, where sometimes I'll get structural edits and there'll be like one bit and I think, oh, that's quite hard. I'll just
just do some stuff around it. And then invariably, my editor will come back and go, this is all amazing. I thought we agreed that we were going to move the thing. And oh yeah, we did. So structural edit, maybe with a second round, and then a line edit, which is where an editor will go through line by line and say, you know, it seems quite odd to me that she likes potatoes, or is it me, or has she been pregnant for 11 months now? Or just kind of generally, just kind of, you know, just sort of checking everything on a line level. I'm not quite sure what this means. You said something like this before. Just really to kind of get down into the detail. And you have a copy edit, which is basically somebody whose job is to, this is going to sound awful, it's not meant to, almost to kind of willfully misunderstand things. So for example, in one novel I had a woman in a bar saying, what are the chances of getting a Cosmopolitan in here? A woman in a sort of country pub rather. And the copy editor said, can you buy magazines in pubs? And I was just like, really? But that's her job. Her job is to say, you said Cosmopolitan, that's a magazine, isn't it? So, you know, so I changed it to Daiquiri, it didn't matter. So a copy editor's job is to just kind of check everything, and they'll check things like, you know, if you say somebody went to a certain university in 1982 and did this degree, they will go and find out whether that degree existed then, and you know, which films were out, and whether you could have been watching Toy Story in 1994, all of these kinds of things. So that very often keeps you out of trouble. And then you also have copy edits, which, sorry, that was a copy edit. And then you'll have a proofread where people check your M dashes, apostrophes, and all of those kinds of things. So there are lots of stages to it and different eyes at every stage, which I think is really helpful, actually.
Yeah, it sounds super helpful. And I know that you do editing for other writers, which someone actually popped in the comments that they just wanted to say that you did a brilliant job on their manuscript assessment for their first novel, and that you got what they were trying to do, and your suggestions were spot on. And it was a fantastic experience. So that was from Julie, just saying thank you there. But you do editing for other writers, and just for anyone that hasn't had a manuscript assessment from you, what does that look like?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll read a manuscript and I'll write a report on it, and the report will cover things like, you know, what I think works, and there's usually a lot of things that work. If you've got to the end of a manuscript, there's lots of good stuff in there, but it's my job to look at what's not working and to suggest changes. And you know, so I look at characters, I look at structure, I look at plotting, I look at things that just made me go, really? And I'll make some suggestions, and then I'll have a call with the author to talk about it. And then alongside that, I'll also take maybe a 6,000 word extract, and I'll do a line edit on it. So what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to give the author the experience of what it's like to be edited by a professional editor, because I know what an editor would say to me about all of those kind of various things. So that's what I do. I tend not to edit full manuscripts, but I'll certainly do my best to give people a good kind of sense of what needs to change.
I'm sure that's massively helpful, just having someone who, you're that step ahead, aren't you? You've published, you've worked with editors, so like you say, you can give a really good idea of what they would say. And there's an extent to which there's that I kind of, the stuff that I wish that I'd known, or just that I found a really long way round to, and it would have been really nice if someone had just said, oh, okay, so maybe this would help, and you just go, oh, so yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. And that leads really nicely onto my kind of final question from me, which is, what is the best piece of editing advice you've been given? And maybe best piece or best pieces. I don't want to put you on the spot, just pick one.
The best piece of editing advice I think I had was, in terms of how it helped me, was probably from my agent, who he's not very edity. Some agents like to do quite a lot of editing. My agent happens to not be like that, which is fine. But it was when I'd written Lost for Words, and it was about to go out on submission, and he'd suggested a couple of changes which I'd made, and then I put another change in, and he said, oh, I'm not sure about that. And I said, oh, well, I could take it out. And he kind of went, yeah. And then he went, no, don't take it out, because editors really like something to do. So you don't want to give them a perfect manuscript. And I thought, you're right, like it's such a good piece of advice, you know, because on the one level, yes, you've got to give editors something to do, and so you want their attention to kind of snag on something, but also if you deliver a perfect novel to an editor, they're still going to edit it, so it's almost like putting in a really obvious thing to just distract them. In order to kind of preserve the integrity. But I mean, obviously that's not the case, but it just really made me realize that I'm not trying to deliver perfection. I'm trying to write the best novel that I can write myself, and then I'm going to commit it to a process which will help me to do a better job. And I think the thing that I didn't know before I was published was what a difference there was between what a writer produces on their own and what ends up being published. And the bit in between is all the writer's work, but it's had a lot of insight and a lot of help. So I think I find it useful to think about that. And I really feel for writers who, you know, they're reading the novels of their favorite authors and they're looking at their manuscript and they're thinking, oh, I can't write like, you know, whoever it is, Margaret Atwood. You know, Margaret Atwood can't write like Margaret Atwood at the beginning. She will also have editorial input all the way through. So yeah, so that's my piece of advice. Editors need to do.
That's such a comforting thing, isn't it? Because I must admit, I was doing my edits the other week of my book, and then I read something by Patrick Ness, who I absolutely
don't do that.
Oh, his writing is so beautiful.
I know that's Maggie O'Farrell. I'm reading Maggie O'Farrell book, and then I just sort of burned my studio down. So yeah.
Absolutely. But it really is like, it's so comforting, isn't it, to think that probably they handed this in and it was nowhere near where it is exactly. Now. It was a collaborative effort, and very comforting. People have asked a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go through some of them. And now, so Ashley asked, it's kind of a two-parter, so do you print with each edit, and then do you ever get in a muddle when you do the structural edit, if you do print it?
I tend to print the structural edit, definitely. And I think you can get in a muddle. So I've got a couple of things that I do. One is that I physically, if I decide that I'm going to move things around, I physically cut them out of bits of paper and I sticky tape them all together. So if I've got a bit that's currently on page 82 and it needs to be on page 19, then I just physically cut it out and stick it. So print on one side of the paper. And the other thing that I do is I divide into chapters or sections, and I write on a post-it note what's happening in that section, so that allows me to stick the post-it notes on the wall and then kind of move the action around without like copying and pasting great chunks in a manuscript. So yeah, it's definitely helpful, I think, to print it out.
And have you ever gotten like into a complete muddle with any of your books and sort of got a bit stuck?
Yeah, I've got a couple of books on my hard drive that I've got a bit stuck on, that I'm, you know, they're kind of 90% there, but they're just not quite. And I just think, oh, okay, one day. So ignoring my own advice. Not in the sense that, you know, they are 100% complete, but they're just somehow not alive, and I need to kind of think about them a bit more. So yeah, they will certainly need work when I go back to them.
Oh, nice, thank you. So Alice asked, how much do we need to worry about spelling and grammar in a novel?
I think if you use the sort of spelling and grammar tools available to you via Word or whatever it is that you're using, then that's probably enough. You know, we all have, I used to think I could spell before I was professionally edited, and you know, there are always things that catch me out, that catch you out, and you'll look at things in horror sometimes after they're published, or even just when you're looking at a printout and think, oh, I can't believe that I spelled that like that. But no, it's there are, if you've got a great story, if you've written a great story, then publishers are well placed to get somebody to sort out your spelling and your grammar. Okay? If you've written a perfectly punctuated spelled story that just isn't breathing, then you know there's nothing that can fix that. So yeah, I would say do your best with it, use the tools available, but it's unlikely to be a deal breaker.
Brilliant, thank you. That's so, like, it's comforting to me because I can't spell for toffee. Sadly, one of the words I can't spell is embarrass, and I find it quite embarrassing that I can't spell it.
Yeah.
So I just I write that characters are mortified or just avoid it. Rebecca asked, how do you diagnose a problem in a scene? And particularly if you're looking at something and you just can't pinpoint what's wrong, but you know that something's wrong.
Okay, so I'd go right back to basics with the scene, and I'd ask myself, what is the point of this scene? To me, every time you have a scene, you need something in the narrative to change. So maybe two people are having an argument, and at the end of it, one of them decides to go on holiday with someone else or something. So you're always thinking, what needs to happen in the scene? What's the conflict, and what's the difference that you get at the other end of it, if you like. And by conflict, I don't necessarily mean massive fight. That would be an exhausting book to read. I just mean what's at odds. Okay, and sometimes it's what one character's understanding of a situation is versus another character's understanding of it is. Sometimes it's that people are at different points in a journey. So you very frequently see this in young adult fiction, where there's somebody who wants to embark on a relationship and somebody that doesn't, and that comes out, and that in itself moves the action on. So if something's not working, you're always asking yourself, what am I trying to achieve? And the other thing that you can do sometimes that's worth doing is writing that scene from a different point of view. So if you're writing in third person, then write in the voice of one of the characters, or write it from the point of view of a character who isn't there, or imagine that one of the characters in the scene is reporting it to someone who wasn't there. And very often that will give you a way in. Okay, and ask yourself, if I took this out, what difference would it make? If the answer is it wouldn't make a difference, then maybe you don't need it, go in your special file. If the answer is, well, X wouldn't do Y, then it would give you something to understand the kind of shell off. When I was writing The Curious Heart of Ailsa Ray, which is about Ailsa and Seb, who meet, they've both had transplants. She's had a heart transplant, he's had a corneal transplant, and I really wanted them to meet, and I had them meeting in a therapist's office, and it's quite good, there was like good quality flirting, and it was, in lots of ways it was going the way that I wanted it to go, but it also wasn't somehow, and I couldn't work out how. And then I kind of realized that when I kind of took it down to brass tacks, I realized that what I needed for them was to meet in a place where the fact that they both had transplants was important. So I needed that to have brought them together. And I realized that the trouble with the therapist's office was that both of them were having counselling, and therefore both of them were just kind of, resolving their issues week in, week out, which is not what you want in a novel. So I thought, okay, where else do people with the same kind of problem or issue meet? And so I put them both on a talk show on the radio, and that was where they met, and that just gave the whole thing a completely different dynamic. So that's an example of thinking, what am I trying to achieve here, and does it have to be in this format?
Oh, thank you. So many helpful tips there. I was going to ask, like, sometimes there's just a point, isn't there, where you do just need to cut something. And yeah. I find it really difficult in my work. It always seems to be the parts that you really like.
Yeah.
And sort of, yeah, just like I love books. I hope most people here do. And I always try to include libraries in my books, and it always seems to be those scenes that I'm like, they just don't work, and I love them so much, and they're so cute. But yeah, you do have to be a little bit brutal sometimes, don't you? Yeah. Julia's asked, how do you know when to stop editing?
That is an excellent question. The short answer is there comes a point when you're no longer improving it and all you're doing is changing it, but that's not a very helpful answer, because how do you know when you're changing it? For me, it's usually the point where I'll be reading and I'll think, oh, what would be great here would be if I kind of referenced the sausages they ate when they first met. So I put that in, and then I turn the page and I've already put a reference to the sausages that they ate when they first met. So usually I get to the point where I'm changing things that I've already changed, or I'm seeing the same things over and over again. And that's usually the point at which it's worth stopping and giving it to somebody else to read.
Oh, really good tip. Thank you. Now, Gemma asked, how do you avoid getting overwhelmed when you're editing?
I find one thing at a time, and I give myself quite small targets, because I kind of, if you print off a manuscript and it's this deep and you do like 10 pages, you just think, oh, that was pointless because there's 380 other pages. So I just give myself, I physically, I've got my pile of papers here and I take 20 pages off the top and I think this is my job for today. So I physically make it easy for myself. And usually what happens is I do the 20 pages and I go, oh, just do another 5 because I'm kind of on a roll. So I think physically just giving yourself a small task to do is good. I think knowing your weakness, like I know that my weakness is sort of continuity, and I'm always putting things like a Tuesday or sometime later, and I know that my editor will come back and go, when you say sometime later, are we talking weeks, months? I don't know. So like I know that for me that's a kind of a weak point. So because I know that, then whenever I come to one of those points, I just make a note of them and put it to one side. And then one day when I'm feeling like 100% there, then I'll tackle that all together. So I think there's an element of knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, forgiving yourself for not, not hitting all of the things all of the time, and just generally allowing. I think you need, when you're editing, it's a big, complex cognitive task. So it's all right to do it for an hour a day and then think, oh, do you know what, I'm done. So I think recognize that it's a big thing, and that if you're tired and you're not getting anywhere, then a cup of tea and a walk might be your best way of editing at that point.
I think that's such good advice, because editing, and I think we all find different parts of the writing process hard, don't we? Some people can draft for a whole day, some people can only manage half an hour, some people can edit for weeks at a time, some of us can only do it, like you say, for an hour. And it's recognizing those kind of strengths and weaknesses, and when we need to split it up for ourselves. I know that I always have a complete moment of feeling absolutely overwhelmed just before I start every stage of the writing process. So I convince myself I can't do it anymore, but then I start and then I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny because I've written enough novels now that I recognize the process, but even though I recognize the process, I'm still in it. So I'll come in from the studio one day and I'll say to my husband, it's just awful. I can't imagine anyone wanting to read it. And I just, and he'll kind of go, yeah. And I'll go, no, you don't understand. Like, my career's over. It's just like, yeah, I think we had this conversation with your last novel at this point. I'm just like, oh, okay. So, I think you just accept that it's a process that you feel differently about as you go through. And sometimes you're overwhelmed, and that's okay. And you just think, well, I'm overwhelmed, so I'll do half an hour. Sometimes you're completely uninspired and you think, well, I'm completely uninspired, but it's okay, I'll just do half an hour. And just sometimes it's trudging and sometimes it's skipping along, and that's okay.
Oh, brilliant. Just one more question from Georgia. So she actually asked quite a long question, which I've summarized slightly. So Georgia, please feel free to whack it in the chat if I've summarized incorrectly. But basically it's about editing as you go. And should you wait until the end of a draft to edit, or is it okay to sort of stop halfway through and go back and edit at the start? What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think sometimes I often find that I'll write maybe 20,000 words of a novel, and then I'll think, oh, I've learned such a lot in that 20,000 words that those 20,000 words are almost redundant. So I could go on, but the character that I've invented, who is a librarian at the beginning, is now a bareback rider in the circus, and it was set in Madrid, and now it's set in, you know, 16th century China, and like everything changes so much. So at that point, then probably what I'd do is I'd say, okay, this is what I've learned from these 20,000 words. I'm going to go back. I'm going to keep what I can, what I like, and what feels valid, and I'm going to change the rest, and then I'm going to write on from there. So, but I wouldn't think of that as an edit. I would think of that as a kind of an informed rewrite almost. So, yeah. So I think there is a case for. I don't love editing as I go, because I just end up. I can spend a whole day, you know, figuring out how to perfectly express this one moment between a couple, and then 3 days later I've written on and half of that couple no longer exists and has no place in the manuscript. So, you know, so I'd much rather write on and keep going and get to the end. But I do think that if the novel is changing a lot, or if you've kind of got to the stage where there's so much that you're trying to hold in your head that it's just feeling completely overwhelming, then I think there's no harm in going back and kind of doing a rewrite and writing yourself into it again.
Oh, brilliant. So yeah, that's all really helpful. I know personally I don't edit at all as I go, just because I really struggle. I think that what I've written is awful when I'm writing a first draft. So if I went back and looked at it, I would really struggle. Do you have those kind of feelings of like, do you need that break away from your work before you go back to edit, or are you kind of happy looking back at it?
I think I'm usually happy looking back at it, but I think usually by the time I've got to the end, I'm usually quite out of love with it. So when I go back, it's better than I thought, because I just think I've just written 80,000 words. And then I go back and I go, oh, okay. Okay. So because of that, the exception to that is when I get the page proofs, which is the last thing that you get before it goes to the book. So it's been to the typesetters, and you get basically a set of pages, which is physically as it will appear in the book. And your job at that point, there's usually a stern email from the editor saying, we're not really looking to make any changes now, we're just looking to find, you know, any kind of errors, and which all writers try to abide by, and generally don't. But I find that really hard, because I know it's my last chance. I know that if I miss something at this point, then there's nothing I can do. And I also know that if it's awful, there's nothing I could do. And if I hate it, there's nothing I can do. And it's just like, and I can't bear it. And I've been known to leave them to really the last minute. And then just sometimes I actually get my husband to read them, and he'll read it, and he'll pick out a few corrections, and then he'll go, it's all right, you can read it. So apart from that very last one, generally I'm quite happy to kind of go and dig into it again, because I think once you realize that editing is going to make it better, then it becomes like a nice thing to do. So there's always a point in the creative process where everything looks terrible. You know, if you watch Bake Off or Pottery Throwdown or any of the things, you know, there's always a point where it all is just literally physically falling apart, and then somehow it's okay. And so I think when you're in the point where it's literally physically falling apart, you just got to go, oh, well, maybe on the next edit I can sort it.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I feel like you've shared like so much wisdom, and this is going to be popped up on YouTube, so I'm going to need to listen back to it again, because I've not got a chance to take any notes. But thank you so much for sharing all that with us, and yeah, it's just been absolutely brilliant.
An absolute pleasure. Yeah, find me on Twitter I'm usually on Twitter, or if there's anything else that you want to ask that I haven't covered, and I can give you my details, or just find me somewhere on social media.